Hey everybody, welcome to Camel City Chat. I'm John McPherson and I'm here with Christopher Chung. Christopher is the CEO of EDPNC. That is the Economic Development Partnership of North Carolina.
It's a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. So EDPNC is what we'll probably refer to it as most of this. But welcome and thank you so much for having me here.
No, great to see you and looking forward to a good conversation.
Oh, we're going to have a great one. As you know, I was fortunate enough to come and spend some time with you in Greensboro because Tony was sick and I didn't know much about EDPNC, and that's what I wanted to talk to you about, is to help me understand economic development and all of our viewers. But so where are you from? Who are you and where are you from, basically? We'll start with that.
I grew up in Columbus, Ohio, which is the state capital of the Buckeye State. My parents had immigrated from Taiwan, probably it's close to 60 years now, probably at this point. But my sister and I, of course, were born in Ohio, grew up there. Really spent my first 31 years in Ohio, including going to Ohio State for college.
I'm sorry, what was the name of the school?
The Ohio
Thank
State
you.
University.
If you're going to do it, you got to do it, okay?
I don't harp on the "the."
We're going to talk about that in a minute. You're going to love some of this stuff, okay?
Sure. Yeah.
All right. So,
but that's my background in terms of where I grew up. Yeah.
And so you were here, but let's go back. Before here, you were in Missouri. That's right. My family's from there. And then before that, you were in Ohio.
That's
in
correct.
Similar positions.
That's right. Yeah, I started in this profession. It's 27 years ago, actually, this month. So my senior year at Ohio State, I started with an internship at what was called the Ohio Department of Development, which was their Department of Commerce, or their main economic development agency. And then when I graduated in '98, had an opportunity to join full time. Was in a number of different roles, everything from managing business recruitment projects to eventually leading the frontline sales team. So the business recruiters, existing industry people, and that was a really great experience. It was all within the public sector. At this time, Ohio did all their economic development through state government. It wasn't until after I left that they privatized a part of that economic development, and now you have a group called Jobs Ohio, which is doing a lot of what I had done when I was there at the state level. So for 7 years after I left Ohio, after 10 years, I went to Missouri to head up a brand new business recruitment organization. Missouri had taken that business recruitment and marketing function out of their state Department of Economic Development and moved it into a nonprofit, more of a public-private partnership model. And I got to serve as the first CEO of that organization and really developed a lot of fantastic experience and relationships, just being part of a brand new organization. Literally, I still remember in November 2007, I started and I had a white paper that laid out the vision for the organization, and I had a promise of X amount of funding from the public sector and X amount from the private sector. Everything else in terms of execution was on me with respect to just building this up, hiring all my employees. I even had to set up my own payroll, go buy my own cell phone, computer. I mean, all that stuff that comes with a brand new organization. That was what it looked like day one. So spent 7 years there. And then when North Carolina was looking to set up a similar public-private partnership, Missouri happened to be one of the states that they benchmarked for comparison, and that's how I got in touch with the people here. And one conversation led to another, and eventually got the invitation to serve as CEO in this capacity, which I've been doing for almost 10 years at the end of this year.
Right, and I just want to make sure, I'm watching that. You're 7, and now 10. I mean,
10, 7, 10, yes.
Okay, so 10 is usually your longest, so we don't have any concerns here, right?
Not
you okay?
that I'm aware of, no.
Is the board taking care of you? Do we need to call them and say?
They are.
All right, good.
No.
So
we're settled here in North Carolina.
So here's our tie-ins, okay? One is I went to Appalachian State.
Yep.
So you like our school because we beat Michigan.
We love your
school. Yeah, right, so that was one. The other thing is, there are some kiddings that we'll do because obviously Virginia and us, we had it and just felt bad and let them have it for a year and then we'll probably take it right back.
Right.
But there's different things going. So I will ask you one question, and because you're a native Ohioan, you do realize that North Carolina invented flight, right?
That's debated with good reason on both sides, John, but for the sake of graciousness, yes.
I mean, you are here now, so, they're crazy.
I think they both have unique takes, and I guess Connecticut also claims this, and I think we can all agree.
We can all agree Connecticut's out,
wrong. Now, I think Ohio says birthplace of aviation, North Carolina says first in flight. Technically, on their own merits, they each have validity to the claim.
It was done here. But so, all right.
I'll concede.
So, you're married, you have kids?
We do, yes.
Okay, and so 2 little girls. So girl dad's the best, right?
It is the best, yeah.
So I always ask, like, what's your favorite place to eat? So I'm not from Raleigh. We're sitting in your headquarters in Raleigh. So what's a great place that you like to eat here?
We may not be the best ones to ask. I actually, ever since the pandemic kind of forced us out of the restaurant scene, at least for a few months there, I actually really discovered I enjoy cooking a lot. So during the work week, assuming I'm not traveling for work, I'll be the one that does the grocery shopping and do all the meal preparation, which I really enjoy. I find that pretty therapeutic at the end of a long day.
What's up with this? Lauren's the same way. He and his wife, they love to cook. I mean, now you, I mean, what?
Well, it's fun. I mean, you can actually, it's something tangible, right?
Right.
You actually are putting some effort and thought into it, and I really like to cook and then improvise a little. I find that that's actually a really fun way to do it. But like I said, that's during the work week. By the time the weekend gets around, yes, we do like to go out, but we are always going out to places that typically we can bring our two girls along.
Right.
They're 4 and 2, so we have to be very mindful that they're not a distraction to other diners and customers, and so that tends to be places where there's outdoor seating, for example. We went to, one of our favorites here is,
No worries.
Players Retreat. It's,
Okay.
of course, right there nearby NC State's campus where we live. That's just an institution there in Raleigh. We like East Cuts, which is a sandwich place up in the Ironworks district. We are checking out a Mexican restaurant here this weekend that someone told us about. They have a young child, and apparently there's like a model train inside that goes around the tables, and it drops off chips and salsa at the table. So we've reserved one of the tables that's right there because hopefully our kids enjoy that.
You got
Those are the kinds of places.
Yeah, I
we're going
understand.
to, yeah.
So, okay, when you're not selling North Carolina to everybody else, what do you as a family or you guys like to do?
We travel, and a lot of our travel is actually through in the form of an RV. In the middle of the or early in the pandemic, when we weren't sure when we'd feel comfortable staying in a hotel again and able to just travel, we decided to indulge one of my wife's longtime desires, which was to purchase a small RV. So we went ahead and purchased a 19-foot travel trailer. We tow it with our pickup truck. And that has really allowed us to see some cool things. I mean, when you get a chance to drive somewhere and stay and camp, that's a very different set of experiences when, like the rest of us usually will hop on a flight and stay in a hotel.
Right.
Just getting a chance to do that and then do it in that form of travel has been really special, especially for the little girls. I hope that they're making some memories that last a really long time. This year, for example, we took 2 different trips, one up to New England, so hit all the New England states, checked all those off the list for my wife and our girls. That was a great way to do it. Earlier in the year, we went and chased the total solar eclipse.
Oh, wow,
Ended up in northwest Arkansas at
A lot
state
cheaper
park.
when you have your own RV.
Well, it depends. I mean, that was a high demand time to do it. But yes, compared to a hotel airfare, yes, it's oftentimes a little bit more economical. And like I said, you get to see the country in a really different way. Last year, we went to the Hot Air Balloon Festival in Albuquerque,
New
which
Mexico,
was, again, a long distance. That's about 1,160 miles, give or take. So split into several days. That's really, travel is pretty much the one way where we feel like we're spending time together, we're making a lot of fun memories, and we get to go see places that we hadn't seen before, or experiences, and that really kind of combines the best of all things.
And aren't you doing research in a sense too? I mean, you got to turn it off sometime, but I'm sure you're doing research.
Before the kids, my wife and I actually would really try to travel so much in North Carolina, partly because we were both new here. We both grew up in the Midwest, she in Missouri, I in Ohio, and just really taking advantage of all the wonderful stuff in our backyard. We still try to do that. Every year we'll try to get out to the Outer Banks and bring the girls at least for one long weekend. But we found that now that we have the RV, we would feel kind of bad if we weren't taking it some distance. We do camp a lot in North Carolina too. Stone Mountain State Park out in Wilkes County. That's
You're getting
fantastic.
closer to me now, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The Outer Banks, we've camped out there, and then Lake Jordan is kind of our local campsite when we're just looking to have a campfire, roast hot dogs, and just get some outdoor time with the kids.
So I keep looking because, I told you we take a break about
sure,
every
of
15
course.
minutes. So I don't want people to think I'm not paying attention to you.
Yeah, no worries.
I want to start down this path because, I love my state. I do. And I want to talk about that at some point in the interview. But I think before that, what the heck is EDP? I mean, what's economic development? I don't understand a lot of times. What is that?
Well, economic development can take a lot of different forms, and we have a specific set of responsibilities at our organization that all fall under that umbrella of economic development. I think economic development is probably best defined when you look at the mission of an organization like ours. Our mission is to improve the economic well-being and the quality of life for the 10.8 million people who call North Carolina home. That is still very abstract, but at least that gets you in the right direction of what we hope to do with our work, which is that by the end of every workday, if we are doing our jobs well, then compared to the beginning of that same day, then hopefully the average person here in North Carolina has more opportunities to develop their economic livelihood. That's really what it's about. But the specifics of how we approach that mission, that's really where the organization comes in. And we always talk about our work in 5 distinct verticals. And I think these verticals help people understand, okay, I get the big picture of economic development, but how exactly does that happen? And explaining the 5 things that we're responsible for is a good way to break it down for people. We're best known for business recruitment. I always tell people that if you read anything about the EDPNC in the Triad Business Journal or the Winston-Salem Daily or if Triangle Business Journal, whatever you're reading or watching, if you hear about EDPNC, I almost can guarantee you it's probably in the context of what kinds of companies is North Carolina trying to recruit here, where did we successfully attract a company, maybe where did we fall short to a competitor state, and business recruitment is, by definition, a very high-profile part of economic development. Because think about what happens when a company like Zeolabig comes into Winston-Salem, right? That kind of headline gets a lot of attention, gets a lot of publicity, and people notice when a new employer comes in from outside the area. That same high-profile visibility really extends on a state level. People know a lot more about our side of the work, our work on that side of the shop, simply because they oftentimes can remember, oh, I remember hearing a headline or seeing a news report about such and such company creating a bunch of jobs here. But we always try to emphasize that's not the only way that economic development gets done, especially within our organization. And that's when we talk about the 4 other areas that we do for the EDPNC. So great to attract companies in from outside the state. And we're focused on getting companies interested in North Carolina and hopefully eventually choosing North Carolina for their future expansion. That's great, but it's very, very competitive. You imagine every state is trying to do that because of the jobs and the investment and the notoriety, if you will, of attracting all this economic development. That has a lot of benefits, direct and indirect. But it's very competitive, which means your odds of success are probably a lot lower than some of these other ways that we try to tackle economic development and deliver on that mission.
All right, so I have a question about that.
Yeah, of course.
And then we're going to take a break. So we're good at that because we're number 1 for the last, 3 years or so of recruiting. Is that correct?
Well, it's important not to mix the rankings up with the actual results. You could have great rankings, but not have any results to show for it. And you could still have a lot of good results and not necessarily have that reflected in the rankings. But that's a little bit more of a complex issue, and we can dive into that.
Well, let's come back after this break, and we'll want to talk about the other 4 things. So,
of course.
Number 1 is recruiting companies in, and then
That's
the 4 probably are going to be the ones that are probably more of the meat of it than anything else.
Well, I wouldn't say the meat. They're all equally important, but like I said, we'll get into that here in a little bit.
Cool. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. So Christopher Chung is here with us. He is the CEO of EDPNC, and we've been talking about you and your family, and then now we've gotten into what economic development is. So I've learned one step, and that is that you recruit companies. What's 2, 3, 4, and 5 then?
Sure thing. So as
That's basic.
Yeah, no, that's okay, and it really isn't rocket science. But not everybody a lot of people don't spend their time in this, and so a lot of my time around the state is spent just talking to different audiences and helping them understand what goes into economic development at a state level. So as important as it is to recruit companies in from outside the state, we never want to forget about the vastly greater number of companies that are already here in North Carolina. We don't have to woo them. We don't have to sell them on North Carolina being a great place. They're already here. They've either been here for a long time or they started here. Whatever the reason, they are here today. What we have to do with that group of companies, of course, is make sure that we're addressing any roadblocks or barriers that may be preventing those companies from continuing to grow, expand, add jobs, and invest where they already are today right here in North Carolina. And so we have a team that's focused on working with our local economic development partners, and they'll go into rooms like this and they'll sit across from a plant manager or a company president or a business owner who's here in North Carolina today, and they'll say, John, what are the issues that are keeping you awake at night? What are the problems that may prevent you from continuing to expand here in North Carolina? And then hopefully some of those issues are issues that we can address by either getting them connected with certain resources or helping get services that assist them with those issues in a way that they can overcome those growth barriers and they can continue to add jobs, employment, and investment here in the state.
So do you get involved, like, I mean, in the past we've had, and I'm not going to get this open, so that'd be funny. I'll do that off camera. But do you have, like, we had a company that was thinking about doing a battery, and it was all about zoning. And so do you get involved with that, even with the local municipalities and stuff like that?
It depends on the issue, right? There's going to be some of those issues, and every conversation is different. I think that's part of what makes economic development really fun when you're interfacing with either businesses you're trying to recruit or companies you're trying to convince to continue expanding here, is that every company is a little bit different, and that's what I love about this business 27 years later. Every discussion, you're going to learn something new about some industry or some company that you didn't know before. Mm-hmm. But all that to say that each one of these issues that a company may be dealing with or grappling with that might be holding them back from expanding, that will look and sound a little bit differently across every single company. Mm-hmm. For some, yeah, maybe it's a permitting issue or a regulatory issue that they're running into. For a lot of companies, workforce availability has really been a challenging situation the past several years. In others, they may be ready to expand, but the economics don't quite add up, and then they learn that perhaps there are some local or state financial programs that can incentivize that growth, and that's enough to push that expansion over the line in terms of making it a little bit more economically attractive for the companies. Bottom line is all these conversations sound differently. We have a team that's out there having those discussions every single day all across the state.
I like the, we're not giving the $9.99 for the new people and then still charging the other number for the others. So I like that that we're working on both of those. So what's number 3 then?
So number 3 is what we call export assistance. And this is essentially like a specialized form of supporting existing companies that are already here. This team is helping a lot of small and medium-sized manufacturers who are interested in selling more of their products outside the United States. We know we live in the biggest economy in the world, but we always remind people that in the United States, we are 5% of the world's population. Right. So 95% of the world's population sits outside our country, which means if you have a product to sell, there's a lot of market opportunities sitting outside. And you don't have to go to the Middle East or Europe or Asia or Africa or Latin America. You can start somewhere like Canada or Mexico, where the U.S. has these trade agreements in place, which make importing and exporting a little bit easier. But what we are doing is we're sitting down with those smaller and medium-sized manufacturers who want to be more of a global company, i.e. have customers around the world, and we're helping them figure out, one, are you ready to export? Like, are you at a point in your company's growth where that makes sense? If you are, then based on your product, which parts of the world might you have the most probability of success? And then 3, helping you figure out how to enter those products successfully with distributors and other customers where you can begin to sell into those parts of the world. And the reason that's all economic development is, think about what happens if you are running a medium-sized manufacturing company. You're selling all in the US today, but somehow because of this assistance, you eventually grow to the point where 30% of your revenue is now coming from Europe or Asia. You're probably going to have to expand to meet that new demand that's now coming from customers outside the United States. And as a result, hopefully you're creating jobs and making investment right here in North Carolina.
And that's not moving out of North Carolina. So
yes, of course. Yeah. At a certain point, if you're racking up enough international sales, it makes sense to have more of a presence in that market. It's the same reason why we see foreign companies set up manufacturing here in the U.S. is at a certain point, they've just generated enough sales in the U.S. where they've got to locally produce things. That would be great if our North Carolina companies get to that point overseas. But keep in mind, most of these companies that we're assisting, they're very early in this process, and they're just figuring out, how do I take advantage of this 95% of the world's population that doesn't reside in the U.S., and how do I turn some of that 95% of the world's population into some of my customers for the products that I make here in North Carolina?
Okay, all right.
4th area is what we call small business startup counseling. Okay. So this is a 1-800 number. We have 6 employees who work in this 1-800 number, staff this 1-800 number, and all day long, what they're doing is they're taking calls from individuals who are thinking about starting a brand new business here in North Carolina. That could be, like a common one might be, I want to start a cafe on my main street, and we don't have a good coffee shop. Something I've always wanted to do, I'm going to do this. Others, it might be something like a landscaping business or a home healthcare business. We had a call a couple months ago that I told people about a mobile cigar lounge. This was the idea that someone had. And what it makes all of these calls in common is these individuals all are a little bit kind of overwhelmed by when they jump on Google and they're like, well, how do I start a business in North Carolina? There's just a deluge of information, and they don't always know like what's true, what's not true, what has to be verified, and hiring an attorney or an accountant to sift through a lot of this, that can be a lot of money, and sometimes most of these folks, they're not willing to put up that kind of money yet. The nice thing is ours is a free service, and we can walk them through any kind of permits, licenses, special requirements, filing needs, any of those early steps that an individual has to take to establish a legitimate business enterprise here in North Carolina, get it properly registered so that they can begin doing all the things that they want to do as that business. That's what our team is there, and they field tens of thousands of calls and emails a year, really providing a human touch to those questions.
Crazy. That's why I'm glad I'm here, because this is...
It's really valuable. I think that team feels very fulfilled because they get that direct interaction with the customers that they're helping. These are people who oftentimes call very daunted by just the volume of information they have to sift through. And by the time they get off those calls 10, 15, 20 minutes later, they feel like they are in a much clearer place about what they need to do to start realizing this dream of starting a brand new business. Now, getting it registered, getting it stood up, that's just one small step in the process, but it is one small step that a lot of individuals, if they're doing it for the first time, really appreciate having that kind of assistance and support throughout that process. And I think the team really feels gratified by the kinds of support that they can give to these individuals. And then we refer those callers to all kinds of other services around like how to write a business plan, or how to secure financing for a small business, or how to do marketing effectively. There's a lot of other great groups out there that are helping small businesses. We're helping with those first few steps, but we feel like that's an important contribution to their success long term.
All right.
Lastly is tourism promotion. So anything designed to get leisure travelers to come to North Carolina. We are the state's, essentially the tourism marketing arm for North Carolina. Right. You will not see our advertisements unless you are outside of North Carolina in one of those markets that we're targeting.
Right.
New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Georgia, DC, Florida. These are some of the markets where you might see, drive time, because we are a big destination for driving travel. I mean, we certainly get people who are traveling by air, especially international travelers, but the vast majority of our external visitor spend here in North Carolina is coming from people within a reasonable driving distance.
And they're coming to see where flight happened for the first... Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Fair enough. They're coming to see all kinds of great things, our beaches, our mountains, and all of that. We are trying to get more and more people to visit North Carolina, not just to spend their vacations here, but what are they doing when they come here? They're spending their money.
Right.
Hotels, motels, tourism attractions, gas stations, restaurants, all those, many of which are small businesses that make up that tourism economy. Tourism spending, I'll give you a chance at guessing this. Can you guess the amount of visitor spending across North Carolina in 2023? I'll give you a hint. It was a record amount.
And it's in the hundreds of millions, right?
I'm going
to say 600 million.
$36 billion.
Okay, so yeah.
36 billion.
And see, you know what's funny is I had Sky and Brian on from the new frame that I guess works with Visit North Carolina and stuff, and I think they may have even said the number, but I'm...
They might have. It was a record year.
Record year.
At $36 billion, I don't have off the top of my head Forsyth County, but we saw 97 or 98 out of 100 counties increase visitor spending from 2022 to 2023. And I think many of them hit their own individual local records for visitor spending. So we're at the tip of the spear on a state level, just trying to get people interested in our coasts, in our mountains, our wineries, our craft breweries, our sporting events, anything that might compel people to want to visit North Carolina. We're out there marketing the heck out of, because of the economic impact that comes with that visitor spending. 200,000 plus jobs supported in our tourism economy by that $36 billion in spending last year.
So all I know is it's economic development partnership. I figure you're at the meeting table with some company and trying to get them to come to North Carolina. So that's only one of the five things you guys do.
That's just one of the five things. And while it gets the most attention, we believe all of it is important, because think about it. If you're a community, we're North Carolina, so as a state of nearly 11 million people, very diverse across all 100 counties, we can play in each one of these areas. But not every community in North Carolina is going to be as strong on tourism as they might be on recruiting industry. Or maybe they have a lot of great tourism assets, but there's not a lot of people in the area, and so it makes it hard to have the kind of workforce that might draw a big manufacturing plant in from the outside. And so this is a way, ultimately, at a state level, about diversifying our approach to growing the state's economy. And we haven't even talked about all the other things that go into economic development: workforce development,
Goodness
Main
gracious,
Street,
this is
rural
crazy.
development, incentives. I mean, all those different things are other inputs that go into economic development. We have a very specific task here at the EDPNC operating under contract with the state of North Carolina.
So I was going to ask how you, and I want people to know this because if they want to get involved, they can. And I know that's crazy to say if you want to get involved, you can, but you can.
Yeah.
You all are funded a lot through North Carolina, but then other organizations and people that believe in your cause also, you guys have investors in that as well too.
We do, yeah. Most of our funding comes from a contract with the state of North Carolina. So remember, the 5 things that we do, it's not as if we were the only ones to start doing them 10 years ago when we were launched. All of this just used to be done within the public sector in a state agency, the North Carolina Department of Commerce. So when EDPNC was created 10 years ago, we were created with the specific objective of taking over the management of these specific functions, but doing so under contract with the state so that there's still very much a strong connection to the public purpose behind all this work. But like a nonprofit, a 501c3, we are able to go out, solicit, and receive private sector funds that allow us to expand the reach of our work. And we are very fortunate to have over 80 businesses, associations, and organizations, including the North Carolina Realtors, who support us anywhere from the tune of $10,000 to $100,000 a year. And what that does is it generates additional funding resources where we can be more aggressive in business recruitment or put more money into what we're spending on export assistance or tourism promotion. It just, at the end of the day, it gives us more resources. And I think for the businesses who support us, they understand that a better North Carolina economic development outcome is ultimately going to benefit them, whether they're a bank, a realtor, a construction company, a utility. All of the success that North Carolina has is likely going to have really positive effects on the bottom lines for all of those businesses, which I think is why so many of them have supported our work since our inception 10 years ago.
So you guys set goals and things like that.
Of course, yeah.
And so there's our cliffhanger. We're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back and talk about the goals. And I'd love to put housing in there and see what your thoughts are on that, if you're willing.
Yeah,
I mean, that's a wild card I kind of threw out there because basically you know everything economics. So why don't we talk about that too? We'll be right back with more Camel City Chat. Welcome back. Here with Christopher Chung. Christopher is the CEO of EDPNC, and we've been talking. I mean, where's the fire hose? This is crazy. I mean, but I knew that about you. I mean, when I met you, I knew that, and then of course I have friends that are in the industry. Of course, Ken McFadden, that I told you about, who's wanting you to arm wrestle with the Virginia guy or something like that. So I at least put Ken in there so we see that. But I mean,
I don't think anyone wants to see that. I think that would draw zero sponsorship
if we're raising
dollars,
money for something, we might want to do it there.
There are probably better ideas out there.
But Snow, I mean, what's your dashboard? I mean, how do you know that you're going down the right path for you guys?
Of course, with 5 such diverse functions like business recruitment, international trade assistance, tourism, there are dashboards for each one of those functions, as you would expect. I think we take pride in holding ourselves accountable for the results that we're responsible for delivering, but those results look really different depending on which part of the operation you're dealing with. Tourism, their big metric are things like visitor spending and how impactful is our tourism marketing in driving visitor behavior in the state. Whereas something like business recruitment is going to be about how many companies have announced new locations here and how much jobs and investment come with those different announcements. And so at any given time, for most of those metrics, we can say, okay, how are we pacing for the year? Are we ahead of target? Are we behind target? But of course, like any organization, we are setting goals every year for those key performance indicators for the organization.
Okay. Now, all right, so we, for 3 years in a row or 4 years in a row, we were number one of what?
There's a lot of rankings. I think the
but
ranking
what's the one that Virginia's like?
Sure,
says, yeah.
That is CNBC's best states for business,
Okay.
and we consider that to be the gold standard of business climate rankings. And there are a lot of other organizations that, some of them being specialized trade publications, that will do a similar kind of ranking. But CNBC gets the most attention simply because they're a very large business media platform, and they promote this ranking quite a bit.
And so we let them have it for a year, and we're going to win it back, right?
Well, Virginia edged us by.
So a thousandth of a point or something?
It's not an opinion based. The CNBC is very rigorous in how they determine those rankings. Basically, they use something like 120 different metrics across 10 different categories. Vibrancy of the economy, quality of the workforce, quality of life, infrastructure. I'm trying to think some of the other ones, innovation, tax and regulatory. 10 categories, 120 metrics,
Right.
and they have sources for every single one of those metrics, and they basically look at how each state stacks up in each metric, and the composite score is what gets them the final score that determines their place for the total ranking.
Right.
All that to say, Virginia edged out North Carolina by 3 out of 2,500 points this year. That's what separated North Carolina from three-peating for the first time ever in that ranking as best state, or at least this year would have been tied.
Right.
Had we gotten 4 points more, we would have been outright winner. 3 points out of 2,500. It is like losing the 100-meter dash by less than 4 inches. I mean, that's the margin of coming in second place. All that said, second is nothing to sneeze about. We are still better than 48 other states objectively in that categorization or that ranking.
And so for you and your team, what are your wins? Like, it blows me away to know and assume, and I'm thinking I'm right on this, is when a company like, let's front the product there, when they're talking about coming to
Bucky's a little
town,
different, right? Yeah.
I mean, you're involved in those conversations.
Yeah, so I'll tell you a good example. We were still...
How do you keep that quiet? I mean, I'd be like,
you remember the companies are often the ones who insist on confidentiality.
Right, I
when it comes to
understand,
business
but it's
recruitment.
just
So a good example where this year we were still licking our wounds a little bit from just barely falling short of three-peating as the best state for business in the gold standard ranking. I think a week or so after CNBC revealed its rankings, North Carolina announced a brand new business recruitment win in Greenville, North Carolina. This is a company called Nipro Medical. It's a Japanese-based medical device manufacturer that is going to create at least a couple hundred jobs and several $100 million of investment at a brand new manufacturing facility in Greenville. This is probably one of the biggest recruitment wins that Greenville and Pitt County has had in recent memory. And this is a company that we have been pursuing on our business recruitment team for the first conversation, I kid you not, goes back to 2016. So 8 years later, from the first point of contact is when the company finally announces their plans in North Carolina. The great thing about it was the first time back in 2016, it was a slightly different version of the project that eventually announced, but they had chosen a location outside of Richmond, Virginia for that project. And of course, we were disappointed at the time. They ended up scratching that version of the project and coming back with a different version and reopened the search. North Carolina, of course, was taken a look at, and of course, long story short, we ultimately won. So yes, the rankings, it's never fun to come in second, but on the things that probably matter more, which are successfully competing for the jobs and investment that can bring quality of life and economic well-being to North Carolinians, winning the projects probably matters more. Now, all that said, I'd love for us to get that number one ranking back because the marketing value is tremendous.
So what about, you have all these different places. How pleased are you with the Carolina Core?
Carolina Core is a great partner, and I think when you look at the assets along that, I forget how many mile stretch it is from Winston all the way down to Fayetteville. I mean, I think that was a really creative approach to marketing a specific geography of North Carolina that has great university presence, great mega site opportunities, a strong concentration of some of the most advanced industries in our state's economy. I think from a marketing standpoint, really valuable. And of course, as it's been around longer, that branding has picked up traction outside of North Carolina. Now, could every single business decision maker and site selector outside North Carolina tell you that the Carolina Core is Route 421 from Fayetteville all the way up to Winston-Salem? No, probably not, but as long as it's picking up some visibility, this business is sometimes about being top of mind or front of mind.
Right.
When a company is thinking, where is my next location going to be? Or maybe I'm going to move from where I am today. Maybe I'm in Chicago or Jersey or New York, and I just feel like the regulations, the taxes, it's too much. I'm going to pick somewhere else. The more front of mind you can be, or top of mind, through business climate rankings, or through a strong marketing presence like the Carolina Core, the more likely you are to have a shot at convincing that company to come to your location. It's no guarantee, but it certainly gets you on the list, gets you on the radar in a way where you have more of an opportunity to win that investment, win those jobs, than if you are completely not on the mind at all of those companies who are making those investments.
So we're in your 10th year, right?
We are, as of
What
next
are
month.
10 reasons why businesses should choose our area, you think?
Well, I mean, the great thing, like I said earlier, is that every company has a little bit of a different formula or calculus for how they're going to make that decision. You can generally say issues like workforce, those 10 categories, for example, that CNBC uses in its ranking, those probably correspond really well to the 10 things that matter most to companies. But rather than kind of a standard elevator pitch, I don't like to give a standard elevator pitch about why North Carolina, because why North Carolina matters.
This is why I like him, by the way.
Well, it matters differently to a company that's in life sciences versus a company that's in warehouse distribution versus a tech company versus a Fortune 500 corporate headquarters versus an aerospace manufacturer. Each one of these industries, let alone each company within that industry, is usually going to have their unique mix of want to have and nice to have. You know this from being in real estate, right? Like, are any two buyers exactly the same? No, they all have their different priorities. And so our job as a sales organization is understand what matters. John, you're the CEO of this company, or you're running the site selection for your company. What are the things that are most important to you? And let us find the best options in North Carolina. They're going to check every single one of those boxes. If we can continue to execute on that time and time again, we ought to have a lot of success, simply because we start in a much better place with a much better product than just about any other state out there, regardless of what CNBC has to say. But we have to listen to what the customer most values and find the best solution for them somewhere here in North Carolina.
Okay. I think, the things that always amaze me is when you start to look and, my wife's family's from Kansas, and so we've kidded around about, why our state's better, things like that. But, the port. That's something that people just don't think about. That we have a great port in Wilmington,
That's right. And another one in Morehead City.
Right, Morehead City, and then we've got the all of the highways, byways, and all that kind of stuff. And so the location between New York and Miami. I mean, it's just there's just so many of those things, and I just think that you guys kind of have stacked deck in a way. But how do we get those industries really to choose us, and that's what you guys do.
It is, and don't get me wrong, we have a standard presentation that rattles through our rankings, what we're doing to reduce corporate taxes, our strategic location, our amount we've invested in infrastructure to connect us to world markets, of course our workforce, all the different feeders that contribute to the talent pool that we have here, be it four-year universities, two-year colleges, people who are exiting military service and transitioning to civilian life, people who are moving here from somewhere else and replenishing that labor pool. All of these things are things that we talk about, assuming we don't know much about that company or things are still early enough where we don't have a lot of detail to tailor that pitch specifically. But as we get to know more about each of these companies, our job is really figure out what's the best solution for them here in North Carolina based on what's uniquely important to that company.
And I know that you have favorites that big wins or things like that, and don't worry, I won't ask you that.
Sure.
How much did it help us that the governor went overseas? Do you think that was a big win for us?
I think I will always take that high level support. I mean, when we can roll out the artillery like that, you can imagine the kinds of meetings that I am able to secure versus what a Secretary of Commerce versus obviously a governor are able to secure when you go overseas. I mean, at a minimum, that's what having a governor at your side does when you are trying to get in front of key decision makers in overseas markets, especially markets like Japan and Germany that really value that high-level engagement with the state's top executive. Right. For us, it's about identifying opportunities and getting all that stuff set up. But if we know we can do that with the knowledge that the governor is going to be there, that's a tremendous selling opportunity. And that's why you see across the country, I've done economic development in 3 different states now, so I can tell you, doesn't matter if they're a Democratic administration or Republican administration, if they are there as the governor of a state, let alone the governor of the 9th largest state in the country, asking for those companies to consider this state as a place for future investment, that's going to have some positive impact, and it can often be enough to push some of these deals across the finish line. And that's why his participation is so much appreciated. And that's something that we hope to have with every future administration. And I think that's something that governors realize is part of their responsibility if they don't already come into office with that knowledge. They know they are the chief salesperson for North Carolina, and it's on them to really try to cinch the deal or clinch the deal,
Yeah,
if you will.
and
on some of these
it's the buck
projects.
stops here. I mean, if the governor's telling someone from overseas, yeah, we can do that, then they believe it.
And the relationship matters, right? I mean, companies want to know they're not just going to be a tenant, right? They want to know that this is a partner that they're getting in the form of local and state government. And so having those assurances from the very top executive of the state, that matters a whole lot. And it's been really good the past few years because the governor, the legislature, they've all worked, despite their differences on a whole host of other policy issues. When it comes to economic development, they really have worked together well to figure out how do we capture some of these huge opportunities that are going to change the trajectory for North Carolina for decades to come.
Cool. All right. Well, let's take our last break, and we'll be back with a little
Sounds
bit
good.
more. And appreciate you. And
Of course.
you're so dang smart. It's just as I've told you, I'm learning here, and this is very important to me because I feel like that every citizen of our state should understand this better. Because even when if I'm sitting in Blowing Rock and someone asks something, I should be able to say something about our state and maybe encourage that person to move here.
That's right. We're all ambassadors for
We
North
are,
Carolina.
true. All right, so we'll take a quick break. We'll be right
Sounds
back. All right, everybody, welcome back. I'm John McPherson. Christopher Chung, he is the CEO of EDPNC. And my first question before we go, we got about 15 minutes before this one is, how do I get smarter? What are, like, when I wanted to know more about the legislature, someone recommended that I listen to Brian and Sky's podcast.
Okay.
And now, or read this or read that. So if I want to understand, and I did just subscribe to Triad Business Journal, by the way.
Okay.
But if I want to learn more about this whole process to be better and smarter, and where do I look? What are some things you recommend I look at?
There are some great associations if you have the time and resources,
Right,
right? I know you don't, but for those who are listening and watching who do, there are some great associations that are dedicated to the economic development profession. Right here in the state, you've got the North Carolina Economic Development Association, but you also have one that's at a national level called the International Economic Development Council. That of course, is probably best for people who are starting off in the profession versus people who more just want to learn more about it. But both those organizations put out a lot of information and hold conferences where you really can go and learn a lot about some of the latest trends and issues affecting economic development at the state or even the federal and national levels. There's a lot of publications that focus on economic development, area development, Site Selection Magazine, even Business Facilities and Trade and Development. Those are a few specialized trade publications that write a lot about the interface between economic development organizations and the companies that they're trying to recruit or help to expand in the state. Tourism, of course, we view that as part of economic development. There's a whole host of associations and publications that focus just on the travel and tourism industry. There are endless resources out there aside from traditional media that people can go to learn more about what goes into this industry.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I've noticed that I really like is, you mentioned earlier, is we have municipalities that are, realizing, hey, we can give you a break here, but we're going to get it back. I mean, it's not like they're giving money away. That's one thing. The other is our community college system and how they immediately adapt to, like when Caterpillar came to Winston-Salem, hey, this is what we're going to do, or different things like that. So then, one of the things that we're having an issue with now is housing. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you've seen the report that Carolina Corps is doing. It's coming out, 2 weeks from tomorrow, I think it is? No, a week from tomorrow. They're doing the event at High Point University. And so there is a definite housing need. And we get the individuals that are saying, don't build it in my backyard. It's like, well, then if you don't build it in your backyard, where are you going to build it? And then, are we going to be... These are things that can stagnate all the work you're doing.
Sure. And unfortunately, none of them is an easy solution, right? I mean, if they were easy, we would have solved them by now. But all of these issues, whether that's housing or transportation or childcare, these are issues that really, when I started in this business in 1997, 1998, they were not on the radar for the vast majority of economic development professionals. And it probably hasn't been until the past 5 or 6 years where the economic development profession has recognized that these are not issues that are off on their own, that have no bearing on economic developers' success. They are very much some of the determinants of whether or not we can continue to successfully grow Forsyth County or North Carolina or even the Southeast U.S. The biggest way these issues show up, whether that's housing or transportation or childcare, is the impact on the available workforce. it's a little bit better right now, the stats are better, but it's still not easy for a lot of employers to go out there, attract, retain the talent that they need, whatever industry they're in. This could be manufacturing, it could be healthcare, education, state and local government, police and fire, construction. There's a lot of industries that are struggling with just the workforce issue. And some of that is because you still have a good chunk of people who are sitting on the sidelines, who are eligible and of the age where they could be working, but for whatever reason are not pursuing jobs that they know to be open. And some of that is, maybe people have reached retirement age. You got to kind of discount those folks that they may not be coming back in the workforce. But that still leaves you with quite a sizable chunk of the working age population that for whatever reason is not pursuing open jobs. Why is that? Housing could be one of those issues. Maybe the jobs are not where the available housing is, where the available housing is where the jobs are not, and so there's a mismatch there. Transportation is something you and I probably take for granted, right? When you hop in a car, drive to our jobs. That's not true of everybody, and if they don't have a reliable way to get to a job, that can be a barrier. And then childcare is probably the one that's gotten the most attention since the pandemic, which when we saw so many child care centers shut down and parents had to take care of their kids at home, it just really threw a lot of havoc into that balance that people need. There's a good number of people who cannot or will not pursue an open job because they don't know what to do about the child care needs of their kid.
The cost of it too.
The cost and sometimes the availability, right? Rural North Carolina probably deals more with the child care availability challenge, whereas urban North Carolina probably deals more with the child care cost. And both of those two things can make it much harder for someone who otherwise would go out there and seek a job. If they worry about where their kids are going to spend their days, or they can't afford it, or it's a wash in terms of how much they earn from a job versus what they're now turning and paying back to the child care provider, that's going to keep some number of people on the sidelines. And unfortunately, that's usually women who are most affected by the child care issue. So I'm not saying there's an easy solution to all of these things, but if we can somehow make a dent in any of these things like housing, transportation, child care, then what you're doing is you're releasing some number of those people who are currently on the sidelines, who are not participating in the economy, not filling jobs, to maybe exit the sidelines and fill some of those jobs that have been really hard for a lot of industries to fill these past few years. And that itself would be a good outcome for North Carolina.
All right, so we got a few minutes here, and,
Sure.
and I normally ask a question, what do you want to be remembered for? I'm not going to do that. I'm going to ask you a little differently. First of all, I know that you are a phenomenal person to work with and for, and you've got a great team. So in the last 10 years you've been here, and thinking of your team and what you all have accomplished, are there any things that you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe this happened? I mean, getting Apple to look at us, or Amazon, or things like that, I know are huge things. But and they can be the smallest or the largest. But what are some things that are accomplishments for your team over the last 10 years that you're proud of?
Well, of course, there's plenty of projects. I mean, you look at the past 10 years, and there's something like 1,300 announcements of companies that we've either recruited or helped to expand here. And remember, this is a team effort. We're working with local EDOs and private sector allies. But those 1,300 projects, big, small, everything in between, yes, of course, that's a point of pride. But you kind of expect every year you're going to have some mix of wins, and that's always rewarding. So for me, the bigger accomplishment is how far we've taken the organization from its inception 10 years ago to where we are now. I think as a new entity, you're always constantly trying to have to explain to people what you do, why you're there to do it. And I'm not saying we don't have to do that today. It's a big state.
Right.
Most people haven't heard of EDPNC, but the people who need to know that we exist, we're a much better known entity, and I would like to think a really well-respected and credible entity with those decision makers. We've had turnover. I mean, I think that's been challenging, especially the past few years. But the nice thing is our people end up going to organizations that we are working with or partnering with, and they become some of the best ambassadors for EDPNC. So I kind of reconciled myself to the fact that we're going to have some amount of turnover.
If you have somebody good, they're going to take them.
Yeah, right. I mean, someone once said that you can either train your people really well and have them leave, or not train them at all and have them stay, right? And most organizations, of course, are going to pick the former of those two. But it is still hard. It spreads the work out over a smaller number of people in that short term. It can be one of those things, if you get 2 or 3 people leaving within a few months, it's one of those perception issues you have to address. Right. So we're always trying to be, how can we be a more engaging, better workplace so that we have a better shot at keeping our folks for just a little bit longer? Right? We'd love to have them their whole careers, but sometimes that just that isn't what those employees want, or they want some advancement opportunities that they have a hard time finding here. And those are things that we just have to be better about as an organization. But we have a great product. We have wonderful partners, a very supportive group of board members and investors, very supportive executive and legislative branch. These are some tweaks that we're really talking about just make us a better organization, or at least even better than where we are. And I think if we can continue to do those things, then I'm very optimistic about the potential future for this organization.
I will tell you, I think at the beginning of this year, I didn't know what EDPNC was.
Sure.
I've spent time with you and been impressed. I now have spent really a bunch of time with you and even more. I mean, we're in good hands. And I can't thank you enough for doing this today, but also thank you for you and your team for everything you've done for our state, because everywhere I travel, everyone knows our state. And I travel a lot, and everyone knows that we're a good place to be, either for vacationing. You know, I often get the, the mountains to the coast, it's only just a few hours type thing. But
Sure.
I mean, you guys have done a phenomenal job, and I just can't thank you enough. I really
Well, I
appreciate
appreciate
it.
that. Like I said, we start with a great product, but we're trying to do our part to make that product even better.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
I
thank you, John.
appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Enjoyed being with you.
Yep, we'll be back next time on Camel Sea Chat. Thanks to Chris, and we'll get the whole website up and everything like that so you can learn more about EDPNC. All the best.